everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the SilentPunt Podcast. I'm your host, Henny Hemmons. Joining me this week is author Chris Warner. Chris is the author of the book Playing for Keeps, Legendary Athletes in Combat During World War II. If you're watching on YouTube, that's the cover right there. This is a very special July 4th edition of the podcast. So reminder to rate, review, subscribe anywhere you're listening or reading on Substack. We're going to talk about a lot of amazing people in this book. One of the cool things that we don't mention in the podcast is the book's pictures. There's over 100 pictures in the book that are absolutely outstanding. You see people like Yogi Berra and Chuck Bednarik in pictures. You've probably never seen them before. And in addition to seeing and talking about those guys, you're going to hear a lot of wild, amazing, crazy stories about people I can almost guarantee you've never heard of. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Chris. Chris, welcome to the SilentPunt Podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you, Henny. Pleasure to be here.
We're going to get right after it with the book, and you get right after it in the book. You waste no time in telling us about the story of Barney Ross and the stranger than fiction, amazing life that he led. Give us the Cliff's Notes version of Barney Ross.
Sure. It's a story that sounds just downright almost Dickensian. He was orphaned at a young age. His father was murdered. He grew up in Prohibition Chicago and actually served as a messenger boy for Al Capone. So his father was murdered. This threw his family into hardship. Several of his siblings were put into orphanages. So he turned to the street and kind of became a hooligan and eventually learned how to fight, learned how to box, became a 3-time world champion boxer, and was immensely popular, very charismatic. And just one of those, rags to riches story. So then World War II comes along and he wants to take part. He's Jewish. So obviously what's happening in Europe with Hitler was very personal. And so because he's such a huge star, though, military brass said, sure, Barney, we'd love to have your celebrity and help to sell war bonds and help with recruiting, or you can be an instructor. He's like, no, combat or nothing. So he goes off to the South Pacific and fights at Guadalcanal, one of the most bloody, horrific battles of the war, and proceeds to kill over 20 enemy soldiers while saving the lives of several fallen fellow Marines. And all the while he contracts malaria, almost dies, is wounded, is shot. But he survives it all. And that's just the beginning. Because during all of this, he received the Silver Star. And he was already famous before the war, all right? And then the war happens and he becomes this war hero. So he comes back, he's decorated. He meets FDR at the White House. And because of his injuries, though, and this recurring lapses of malaria, he becomes addicted to morphine. And that would certainly take its toll. And it really almost derailed everything. But in true Barney Ross fashion, he eventually kicked it and then became a very loud advocate for drug rehabilitation. It's such a remarkable story. We were chatting earlier and I told you that when I was doing research for it, I really thought about kind of tamping the story down because otherwise no one would believe it.
Yeah, there's several of those instances in the book, and that kind of my first question. Wherein you obviously did a crap ton of research for this. Where did Barney Ross fall into in terms of, you researched him first, or in the middle, or towards the end?
Here's what's crazy. I set out with a rough outline for the book, and I've written about military history and sports extensively over the years. So combining them has probably always been fermenting in my brain. So I had a rough idea, and there were some people that I'd written about before in magazine articles. So I had an idea of about 12 that I wanted to profile and feature in a book. And through my research, I stumbled upon the incredible story of Barney Ross. And interestingly, that name will ring a bell with a certain, generation, current generation, because of the Expendables. And, when Stallone was writing it, he, of course, is a boxing aficionado. So he knew Barney Ross's story. So it was no accident that he decides to name the lead character in The Expendables, a story about these badass mercenaries who save the war or save the world from evil, that, of course, he would name the character Barney Ross.
Yeah, that was
So that came to me, yeah, kind of late, and then, I just poured over research and just couldn't get enough. It's just such a remarkable story.
and kind of a slam dunk to put him first, huh?
Yeah, because I mean, I know history, isn't for everyone, um, and I definitely straddle the line, I think, between it being a military history book, and a sports book. But yeah, I mean, history can just be dates and names and places for a lot of people. But if the Barney Ross story doesn't grab you, well, then probably nothing will.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. Um, you talked about Stallone. Tell the folks about the Jack Ruby connection as well. I love these little tidbits.
Right. So while he is surviving the mean streets of Prohibition Chicago, one of his pals was another youth named Rubenstein, who later changed his name to Jack Ruby. And they remained friends their entire lives. In fact, Ross would even appear as a character witness during the trial after the assassination of Oswald.
I did not know that.
So that is just one thread that runs through this incredible story of Barney Ross. And there's many others. And like I said, it was really, I mean, it came down to a point of, okay, what do I want to include? Because there's so much to tell.
Yeah, I have in my notes for later, but we might not get to it. And this reminds me of it. Lou Zamperini, the guy from Unbroken. Did you read that book or see the movie? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I saw the movie. Great story. And actually, during the book tour, this comes up a lot of, why didn't I include, certain people? And that's a name that's frequently brought up. And um, I wanted to be very specific and not overuse the word legendary, right? Legendary athletes in combat. So everyone in the book was certainly at the very top of their respective sport, whether it be football, baseball, basketball, track and field. So they were all either future Hall of Famers, all stars, world record holders, Olympic champions. And I just didn't want to include very good athletes when again, I just wanted to whittle it down to the cream of the crop.
Yeah, the thing I read the book first, his book first, and then saw the movie, and it was almost like, and I was thinking about this with Barney Ross and like how you would make a movie about him, because the movie about Zamperini couldn't fit. His life was so amazing, it couldn't fit all of that a book could fit. And I kinda got the same feeling with Barney. It's like, how do you pick and choose what to put in and what to leave out? Because all of it is just flipping amazing.
Well, and with some of the better known athletes in the book, guys like Bob Feller or Yogi Berra, everyone knows their story, and those are well plowed fields that I had no desire to revisit. I really wanted to focus on their combat experiences, and so that is really the thrust of most of those featured in the book, most of the chapters.
We're going to take just a brief pause here before we get back to the next guy, um, and learn a little bit about you. Um, your profile is diverse to say the least. Actor, writer, historian, former elite athlete, All-American in the decathlon at New Mexico, on the U.S. bobsled team. Um, I have to tell this story because I just read it in the last month, and I've told like 10 people because it's one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard. Um, Bo Jackson he was a track athlete as well. There's a story in a book I read about him. He's doing the decathlon, and he had hurt his groin, and whichever groin it was for the high jump, he couldn't do the high jump part of the decathlon. So he just did the high jump off the other foot.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, as a decathlete, that's insane, right?
Most people you would have to call bullshit,
Yeah.
but not
Everything about that guy is
not Bo
like, yeah,
yeah, I was fortunate. When I was living in LA, I saw Bo Jackson play for the Raiders,
gosh.
before the hip injury, and yeah, everything you read about Bo, I mean, it's just once in a generation athlete for sure, and you know, he really was just a one-man track team. Also started on the baseball team. Could have certainly probably played in the NBA. I think there's some maybe you're familiar. I remember reading a story about like the greatest day for any athlete. And it was something like, he competed in, he was at Auburn, right? So SEC competition. And he competed in, I think, the 100 meters at a track meet in the morning, and then played in a baseball game in the afternoon. And then, of course, would go on to win the Heisman Trophy, and just remarkable. But again, I mean, it's like, you look at this stuff on the surface and you're kind of have to shake your head and go, really? But our generation, though, yeah, we saw, I mean, he was the real deal, and became an all-star in baseball, while playing in the NFL, and completely dominant. There was really, I mean, there was no one like him.
Not at all. So you studied journalism in college. Um, what was your route after school? What's like the first thing you did? Did you work in journalism right away, or do other things first?
Yeah, I mean, I started, I guess, just like most people, just kind of freelancing, and then I moved to Los Angeles, hell bent on becoming a screenwriter, and quickly learned that I was far more likely to get hired hitting the ground or getting thrown through a window, than as a writer. So I started as a stuntman and did a lot of commercials, and that was my foot in the door. That was my entree, and so that led to pursuing acting, which is something really I never set out to do, but for me, it was just always one door leading to another.
And what I know it's in the book, but one of the first things that I was interested in and kind of went to find out in the book is what break, because I'm always, and we'll talk about this at the end, always fascinated by these stories because I loved baseball growing up. I still love it. Um, but the further you get away from that time period, I think the less people understand about it. Um, Tell the listeners kind of the personal connection you had to writing these stories and what led to this book.
Well, the only person in the book that I personally met was Bob Feller, and it's just one of those great childhood stories where my grandfather took me to an Albuquerque Dukes game,
Mm.
um, which at the time were the top farm club for the Dodgers. And this is well after Feller had retired, and he was there signing autographs. And he signed my baseball, which I lugged around for years, and just countless moves. And eventually it got lost, or I don't know, maybe it's still in my sister's attic somewhere. But just that memory though of meeting the legend, right? Um, and then later writing about him. Recently, I drove cross country from New York to Oregon, and I was behind schedule and I'm driving through Iowa and I see this sign for Van Meter, which to say, to call it a dot on the map would be an exaggeration. Little farm town, right? But it's the home of Bob Feller. So I had to stop, and I'm so glad I did. There's a mural there, and there had formerly been a museum that's now City Hall. So, and I knew Feller's story. He was the first professional athlete to enlist after Pearl Harbor, and this at a time where he was the biggest star in baseball. Certainly, the best paid pitcher, a guy that made it to the show at 17, and not for a cup of coffee. All right. Let's just be crystal clear on the fact that at age 17, when most kids are a junior in high school, he is dominating grown men in the golden age of baseball, striking out the likes of Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio. So he's 21, he's just got this incredible life. And I mentioned in the book, that moment he was driving, he was in his brand new Buick, right? Listening to a radio, which was like, a big deal back then. You had a radio in your car, and he heard the news and he's like, I need to join. I need to take part in this. And knowing that he could use his celebrity to inspire others. Um, and so for me in writing the book, it's really wanting to honor the legacies of these just extraordinary athletes who switched uniforms at a time when their country really needed them most.
And you had an uncle, right? And you inherited a lot of his stuff from the war. Share with us that connection.
Absolutely, yeah. The probably the person responsible for piquing my interest in military history at a young age was my great uncle, my grandfather's youngest brother, country boy from Arkansas who flew combat gliders in the ETO, took part in Operation Market Garden, Operation Varsity. Every mission essentially was a suicide mission. And just hearing those stories of just, incredible courage, um, uh, definitely got me hooked at a young age, and wanting to read more, about World War II and military history in general. So, when he passed away, I was fortunate to become the beneficiary of his scrapbook that had all these old photos. In fact, I'll show you. He bought this camera when he was in
Wow.
France,
Wow.
right? He took this with him on board from the cockpit, and, I've got photos that show him flying over Germany, crossing the Rhine, and probably my most prized possession would be his wings.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, just priceless, right? So, yeah, these are all family treasures, and, it really kinda, yeah, I guess, kickstarted my interest in the subject.
That's amazing. The next guy I want to ask you about is somebody that I feel like I should have known longer in my life than I did, but about I don't even know 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was a quarterback at the University of Michigan who was wearing the number 98, and he was doing it in honor of Tom Harmon, and I had never heard of Tom Harmon prior to that, which I feel kinda embarrassed about saying. So let's talk about him. Give us, the lowdown on Tom.
Yeah, probably not unlike Bob Feller, one of the biggest celebrities of his day. So he's the 1940 Heisman Trophy winner and just also played varsity basketball at Michigan and, is the big man on campus. But interestingly, though, I mean, as sure as you well know, the NFL really wasn't that big of a deal at that time. College football was much, much more popular. So he was selected number one in the draft by the Bears, but he chose to pursue a career in broadcasting instead. Um, and then the war happened. So he goes into the recently formed United States Army Air Force and initially is assigned to North Africa. And while en route on a B-24, runs into turbulence and crashes in the jungles of French Guiana. He's the lone survivor. So he survives that and then switches to fighter command and flies P-38s over Japanese occupied China, where he becomes involved in this furious dogfight, is able to uh, get 2 kills, Japanese Zeros, and then his plane catches on fire, has to bail out. So he winds up spending over 30 days missing in action. And mind you, this is Tom Harmon. This is the biggest football player in the country. He makes headlines wherever he goes. Where's Tom Harmon? And ultimately, he would later say in his autobiography, it was his football legs that allowed him to endure certainly what was the most hellish experience of his life, during which he lost 50 pounds. He suffered from dysentery, from malaria, was badly burned all over his body. So you figure, I mean, who else but someone like a Tom Harmon, right, could have survived this? And what that meant for morale, it's just indescribable, Henny. I mean, immeasurable, because what it said is, you can't beat us. We got the likes of Tom Harmon on our team. So it's just an incredible story. And after that ordeal of surviving two plane wrecks, he's allowed to finish his service stateside as an instructor. He marries a beautiful actress named Elise Knox. Together, they raise a family and have children who are all ridiculously good looking and talented, including their son, Mark Harmon, who became the star of NCIS. And when I was writing the book, I reached out to Mark, and we had actually, I'd worked with him on an episode when I lived in Los Angeles. And he was kind enough to provide some details and some colorful anecdotes about his famous father, including the fact that his mother used the silk from
Mm,
Tom Harmon's parachute to
I
make
love
her
that.
wedding dress.
I love that.
So just great stuff. And so he became a very renowned announcer, was I think part of those early wide world of sports crews, he'd be on location from Innsbruck, Austria or wherever. And then that's how a lot of people got to know him without realizing his exploits in World War II.
Story. Yeah. You're talking about morale, and it would be like Tom Brady or LeBron James being missing in action for 30 days and being a war hero. I mean, it can't even wrap my head around that. I could have asked this same question for Barney. I could ask it for some of the other ones. From a writing perspective, do you almost have to tone down how you're writing it, because the material itself is just so fascinating and amazing? I can almost see myself like trying to almost tone it down a bit. Was that something that you thought of consciously?
I did. And I certainly did not want to be blinded by some of their, larger than life glow. Um, it's interesting that Warren Spahn, right, who remains the winningest left-hander in Major League Baseball history, actually sued a publisher for false praise, because someone had written a very flattering biography and just saying how Spahn had, single-handedly taken out a machine gun nest and, won the war. And, Spahn fought at the Battle of the Bulge. He was at Remagen. He was at Herdgen Forest. He was wounded, received a Purple Heart. But he was an honest guy. Spahn was a stand-up guy. And for him, the heroes were the guys that never made it home. So he sued this publisher. It was a landmark case for false praise, and he won. So, it's a story sometimes that you will still read about Spahn and how I think, he won the Silver Star, which he didn't, and he just really wanted to set the story straight. Um, so I spent a good part of 2 years writing the book and just poring over research and just cross-checking everything. And so that was important to get the story, but at the same time, though, um, I did not want to deny readers, the thrill of reading about how some of these stories are just downright cinematic. And when I was putting, you know, let's say Barney Ross's story together, um, watching this play out in my mind, um, was a movie. And if anyone at Netflix or History Channel is watching this, and I know you are, I think the book and certainly several chapters would make for an amazing historical documentary series. For that reason alone, is that you could do a recreation, as well as talking with experts in different fields, and just telling the story of these amazing athletes.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I didn't have this written down as a question, but as you were talking about Warren Spahn, it popped into my head that you might have a really good viewpoint on it. You talked about his kind of wanting to set the record straight. The other thing with a lot of these guys and a lot of veterans from that era is they were extraordinarily humble about the experiences. And, maybe some of that was humility. Maybe some of that was, some PTSD. I don't want to go there in my life. But I find it interesting that nowadays there are so many soldiers online, on YouTube, writing books, going deep into what they did, who they killed. Um, Interesting is, I guess, the word I'm going to use, the dichotomy of those two things. Have you thought about that before?
Yeah, and that's why it was certainly a different generation. They came home from the war, and many were traumatized. I know my great uncle was. He never flew again. Just to give you an idea, and they didn't call it PTSD, um, and battle fatigue, maybe,
Shell
but
shock.
they came back and they, I think, would do their best to compartmentalize and put the war behind them. I don't think it was something they ever forgot, but no, they didn't talk about it. You know, Someone like Gil Hodges, who's in the book, and who fought at the Battle of Okinawa, as did Hank Bauer. Right, one of the bloodiest battles in history. Um, just horrific carnage. So what they would have experienced and what they would have saw certainly would not be anything they would like to relive. Just to put things in context, the casualties at Okinawa were twice that of the attack on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So when they came back, they just got on with their lives. And with someone like Hodges, he um, became, really the heart and soul of the Dodgers, and then became a great manager, and won with the '69 Mets, the Miracle Mets. And I think there's a good reason. I mean, as horrible as combat is and war in general, I think those who did survive and came back alive, they did benefit in some ways. And I think with Hodges having been a Marine, he took what he learned in terms of discipline, sacrifice, honesty, and he was able to instill that in young men and his players. Hank Bauer did the same thing.
Uh, Next is one that I knew and was really excited when I saw his name because I had only recently in the last year or two learned of his story. Another amazing one, Emlen Tunnell. Tell us about Emlen.
Emlen Tunnell, right? So he went into the Coast Guard and had been a star athlete in college, but went into the Coast Guard and like a lot of black soldiers, worked in either a segregated unit or in a, I guess, more subservient role, like a stevedore. And he's he winds up in the South Pacific. His ship, which was a cargo ship, they were unloading and they're hit by a torpedo, by a Japanese torpedo. And through the chaos and the smoke and the fire, he sees one of his fellow sailors completely engulfed in flames. And Tunnell instinctively grabs him, pulls him to safety, and puts out the fire with his bare hands, saves the man's life. A few years later, they are off the coast of Newfoundland, and another sailor had fallen into freezing water. Tunnell jumps in, and this is a guy from Philly who could barely swim, all right? Didn't spend a whole lot of time at the country club, all right? What do they call that section of Philly, Henry? I know you're from the area.
The main line.
The main line, right? And so he jumps into the water and he saves another life. And I mean, like, what did you do in the war? Well, just saved two of my fellow sailors. That's all. And then goes on to have this storied career. Winds up becoming the first African American elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Played for the Giants for 11 seasons. And here's the statistics that's incredible, because I think for certainly most people who either never saw him play or never heard of Emlen Tunnell, he still ranks number 2 on the all-time career interceptions list. Think about that, 71. And this is during an era where they didn't throw a lot.
Right.
They did not throw. It was mainly run oriented, right? And he, his nickname was Offense on Defense, Emlen the Gremlin. And really, in many ways, certainly changed the position of defensive back. And I know that you could probably speak to that at length, Henny. But just such an incredible story that also certainly plays very cinematically, without having to really add anything other than what really took place.
Yeah, first black player in the Hall of Fame, first black player on the New York Giants.
Correct. And there's a great story, and you've read the book about how he hitchhiked, right, from his hometown just outside of Philly to New York, to essentially go and audition, all right, for the Giants ownership, and just say, listen, I think I can really help your ball club. And so, thanks to a truck driver driving, a banana truck to New York City, the legend of Emlen Tunnell was able to continue.
That's one of the things I love about history and that era of the country. There's just things like that, happenstance things that happen that lead to those things. Things now seem very, I have to do this. I apply for this job. I've got a plan. I just love that, I was talking to my dad about that last week in, picking a college. I didn't really know what I was going to do. And it's just so different from how the world is now.
Right.
As crazy as Barney Ross's life was, and so many of these stories are undertold, do you have an opinion? Like, Emlen has had a little bit of a renaissance in really recent years in terms of people knowing about him, particularly in his community. Why do you think he's maybe not as well known as even a Barney Ross or a Yogi Berra or some of these other guys that are in the book?
Well, fame is certainly a fickle mistress. And in 20 years' time, will people remember Tom Brady? Maybe.
Maybe not.
So that's understandable. I mean, and probably even though someone like Yogi Berra, and even the most casual sports fan has heard of Yogi Berra, but they really only may know him because of the commercials. But yeah, he's that guy in the Aflac commercial, right? And he was such an astute businessman, really. If you go online, there's this great old commercial for Puss in Boots cat food. that must have been shot in the 60s. And Yogi's having this like full on conversation with his cat. And the cat's like, yeah, Yogi, us athletes need to stay in shape. And it's amazing. You can find it. It's great.
There's a
Um,
picture of that in your book, right?
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's understandable that that these names have been forgotten. Um, and that's just kind of, again, the nature of it. But I I think, they're certainly unforgettable and their contributions immeasurable. Um, one thing you really have to keep in mind in terms of morale, and not to bang this drum too loud, but things are not going well in the early stages of World War II. You have the attack on Pearl Harbor, which remains the single worst defeat in U.S. military history, followed by the fall of the Philippines, Guam, Singapore, Burma, Malaysia. And then on the other side of the world, German troops occupy most of Western Europe. Things were grim. America needed some good news, and they got it when some of the biggest superstars in the country joined the fight. And so, for that, right? And even if it was just symbolic or psychological, nonetheless, I just think that that spirit certainly applied to the war effort, where people realized, okay, we're all in because we have to be. It's going to be difficult, but the war had to be won. Hitler had to be stopped. There was no alternative. So, I liken it to the analogy of, let's say, you're on a floundering team or the fan of a struggling team that experiences one devastating loss after another. And then suddenly, LeBron James is on your team. Okay. Or Aaron Judd. Like, okay, well, how
You
can I
can't
lose?
lose. Right. Um, I'm going to skip Yogi Berra just mostly because most people will have heard of him, but I will bang the drum that you banged, which I think the vast majority of baseball fans probably don't understand, that he's unequivocally the best catcher in baseball history.
And I will challenge anyone to a knife fight who argues otherwise. So
All
all
right.
of you Johnny Bench fans or whoever, please. And the one statistic that really, I think is most overlooked was Berra's ability in the clutch, and there was a really good reason for that. And I don't know if you saw the documentary that his granddaughter Lindsay Berra executive produced and narrated, but she talks about how Yogi's experiences at D-Day profoundly shaped the rest of his life. Because when you've been shot at and when you've experienced that kind of danger and death and carnage, baseball is not pressure. So for him, bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, he didn't crumble. That was an opportunity, and he stepped up. And on a team loaded with superstars like, Mantle, Maris, Whitey Ford, Joe DiMaggio, that was really the one thing that Berra was better than all of them. And again, it goes back to when he was just, a scared teenager, right, at Omaha Beach.
That leads perfectly into the last guy I wanted to talk to you about, who is fan favorite of mine. I've got a almost life-size picture of him in my home. Chuck Bednarik, Concrete Charlie, Last of the 60-Minute Men. You're talking about how Yogi's experience prepared him for baseball. You do a really nice job in the book of talking about that with Chuck. Explain that to our listeners.
Concrete Charlie. Wow, right? One of the greatest nicknames,
Yeah, for sure.
but certainly well deserved. He again was just a son of immigrants whose family immigrated from Eastern Europe. His father got a job at Bethlehem Steel. Not easy work, and probably is where Chuck would have wound up had he not become a star athlete. But then he wound up skipping his senior year in high school, went into the Air Force, and became a waist gunner on a B-24. So his first mission, he wound up flying 30 missions, all over Nazi Germany. The first one was basically to Berlin and back. So, welcome to the war, son.
Jeez Louise.
And yeah, so you wonder, it's like, okay, how did he get that tough? Well, he's very forthright and honest and saying, listen, I was scared shitless like everyone else. I was lucky to survive. But it would certainly set him on a path of a storied football career at the University of, he played his entire career in Philly, right? Because he started at University of Pennsylvania and then was drafted by the Eagles. And here's a trivia question for you. Who's the only Ivy League first round draft pick? Chuck Bednarik. Yeah.
As I was reading the part about the planes, I could just not picture all those movies that I've seen where they're flying into enemy territory in one of those ginormous planes and just getting strafed, and thinking about Chuck Bednarik being in one of those things. Just frightening.
Right. Right.
And talk about like what he thought that added to him once he got to the NFL.
Yeah. He was already brawny, you could say, in high school. He was starting to emerge and was probably bigger and stronger, and stood out. But when he came back from the war, having had that experience and had certainly matured. So I think from a physical and psychological point of view, he knew he had an edge. In fact, I mentioned in the book, there's a quote where he says, he walks into the locker room and he looks around and he sees these young kids, and he's thinking to himself, I could kill every one of them. Right? And so he immediately becomes a starter and really, could have played any position. All right, becomes a linebacker then, but also handled all of the punting and center duties. So just an incredible all-around athlete. He was a really good basketball player as well. So it's not surprising that then he would, of course, become the last of the 60-minute men, a player who stayed on the field until the final whistle.
Yeah. And one other thing that you mentioned about him in it, and I happen to have a picture of this in my home as well, is he's the famous collision with Frank Gifford.
The hit
that ended Frank's career.
Yeah. Yeah, and they actually became good friends. And they, Chuck would kid him and say, yeah, I made you famous, Frank. Or maybe vice versa. But yeah, in terms of just Philly sports lore, right? Is it getting bigger than that?
Not much.
Yeah.
And running off the field in the 1960 championship against the Packers, and I think he's talking to Jim Taylor, I think is who he tackled at the end.
Yeah.
Just amazing stuff. And I think you had a picture in the book as well of his hands. I have seen his hands before in pictures. A more gnarly set of digits I don't think I've ever seen in my life.
That photo, I was fortunate to get the rights to it. And I just felt, okay, talk about, a picture tells 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if he broke any joints or had any ligament damage during the war. Because certainly, when you're playing football, as well as anyone, injuries are inevitable. But yeah, he manned a machine gun on B-24s. Liberators.
That's insane. Well, the book again, Playing for Keeps, Legendary Athletes in Combat During World War II. Chris writes a bunch about this on Substack as well, so feel free to find him there. This is, if you're watching on YouTube, the cover of the book. Anything you want to leave the folks with before we say goodbye, Chris?
Sure. Yeah. I You can also get more information in terms of how to find the book. I'm on most major online platforms. You can also go to christopherwarner.org, and that'll give you all the bells and whistles you need.
And one of the things I liked about this book is that I love reading a book from beginning to end and the story and whatnot, but you can pick this one up, you can put it down, you can skip around. Oh, I want to see this guy and that guy. I like when a book does that sometimes as well. So,
Yeah, that was intentional, Henny, and thanks for actually bringing that up because, like I said, it really straddles, I think, between being a sports biography book and a book about military history. And I wanted them to be accessible. So I was warned against using multiple sports. But for me, though, I really wanted that cross section, though. I wanted football, baseball, basketball. I've got a swimmer, a bobsledder, and of course, Barney Ross. And so whatever your cup of tea, right? And even if you don't really care for either subject, and just are interested in captivating stories about some just remarkable, inspiring men.
captivating and remarkable. I think that's a good spot to leave it. Thanks again.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it.